Hey everyone, hopefully you're having a good day. My name's Andy. My channel's Finding Value. Today we're going to talk about one of these questions that someone has asked. It looks like a pretty good question. It says, I have a question for you. We know that the housing starts are inflationary, but if the US was to have 1.7 million housing starts and the average new mortgage amount is 411,000, that only adds to 0.7 trillion to the money supply in the form of new mortgage loans. Compare this to the Fed printed around 4.5 trillion in 2020 alone and more in 2021. In almost all the previous years, looking back to 1990, the money printing was between less than zero point 0.5 to 1 trillion a year. What I'm asking you is if you see the possibility that previous to 2020, the inflation generated by new housing starts had a greater impact than this time. The money printed by the Fed was low in comparison to the amount added by new housing. But this time, it might not have the great of an impact. If my assumptions calculations are right, we might be coming from a higher high to a lower high if the Fed starts to reduce money printing. I want you to poke a big hole in this thesis of mine or tell me if you see how I am wrong. Thank you for all the great information that you share with us. Actually, that's a very logical and great comment. I do have the same the same outlook or paradigm that you have. So they printed a bunch of money, they threw it into the system, and then we could see a lower, potentially a lower inflationary rate, a disinflation to a lower high. That is all well and understood, but what moves the markets? This is where when I get deep into thought, it's like what moves money in the markets and what causes people to move that money? And to me, it's interest rates. So they put this huge amount of money into the system, and we've got the continued movement of money from real estate. So it's the combination of a couple things in the system. Money that is printed has to be directly sent to people in the system. Otherwise, that money is not inflationary, at least by the way that they measure it. So the way that they measure inflation, because that's what it's going to go back to, is how do you measure inflation and where does that money come from in that inflation measurement? They measure it through the consumer price index. And that is a measurement of what they consider, they pick the goods, they do the hedonic adjustments, they do all that stuff in the numbers. So the money comes into the system, it has to go and flow through into the consumer price index, which then influences the habits or the investments that people have in bonds, which then raises the interest rates. And then when interest rates go up, it redirects money differently into certain investment vehicles. What I think is going to happen is you're looking at just the housing starts. And that is one thing to look at. They dumped all this money in, and what you're saying is 100% right. What I'm speculating on and what I think may happen, and remember, guys, this is all just, we'll call it speculation on what could potentially happen. But this is what I think may happen, is money is going to get spooked and start to rotate based off interest rates. So if the interest rates go up, I don't know what the key amount is, but it looks like it's already having an impact on the NASDAQ. It looks like it's having an impact on the S&P 500. And these movements almost always occur under an expansionary phase of real estate that I've seen. So while the money may not seem like the total account, it's the impact and the rotation that has the larger impact on everything. So for instance, I'll try to explain it as best I can. It's kind of, I'm trying to get it all lined up in my head so you guys can understand this, at least the way that I see it. And hopefully that's the way it plays out. So here we go. Money comes into the system. The only way money can get into the hands of people is through commercial bank lending, basically, or they have to literally send checks out. So the money printing that happened, you would take how many checks were sent at $1,500 or $3,000 or whatever the total stimulus was. That's what got into the system. Now, the money that you're accounting for is money that came into the system, but all those stimulus packages, they may have went in as bank reserves and never made it into the system, so to speak. So one aspect that I'm going to hit on here is all of that money may not get into the system. It's like previous money. Previous money, they printed it, they went into the banks as reserves, but it didn't get loaned into existence. So that inflation never hit the system. But it did get directed to assets that the banks purchased. we'll call it stocks and bonds. So they bought bonds with it, they bought stocks with it. They're getting a return on that money, but it never made it into the system where you could officially see it in the CPI. Now what's happening is we're getting that money into the system and we're starting to see it in the consumer price index numbers, at least the way that they measure this inflation. I don't measure inflation that way, but that's the way that people generally perceive the measurement of inflation. Now, what is going to happen is if interest rates go up and get spooked, those bondholders, they say, okay, we've got inflation in the system. I don't want to own bonds. I'm going to own something else. What happens is a big rotation of money starts to occur. That money starts to rotate into certain things. That could spark more inflation. So the driver of it is the original inflation that either they created or that the housing starts created, or the combination of both, because we were kind of going through this together at both. That puts some money that rotates into other items. Now that's going to put stress on the CPI number perhaps, because if money is leaving bonds and stocks and going after commodities, and that is a, quote, demand for commodities. You could look at that from countries. You can look at it from all different aspects and angles. Whoever's buying the commodities, it doesn't matter. It's a demand for commodities. If the commodities get taken off the market, so to speak, and there's those demand, and the supply isn't there, prices start to rise. That is what's going to hit the CPI numbers. That is what's going to increase the interest rates, and that's when it's going to spark more money rotation. Now, there's many, many, many trillions that went over there into stocks and bonds. That all has to come back out. That has to find a new home. Where is that house, and what is that going to have an impact for the consumer price index? If that money seeks commodities, if countries say, I don't want to buy bonds anymore because of the inflation around the world, and then they start buying and doing projects, it's going to drive commodity prices higher. If commodity prices higher, get driven higher, then you're going to see your CPI numbers go up. It's a self-feeding loop. And I see a lot of people also, that's kind of my answer on that. Hopefully I did a well enough job explaining it. It starts with housing starts or the stimulus money or the combination of both. It causes consumer price inflation. That consumer price inflation has an impact on interest rates. Interest rates has an impact on money flows, and money flows in a self-feeding loop go back to commodities, precious metals, or whatever it is, feeding on itself continually, in creating this loop until the loop is broken. And the way that I see the loop being broken is the housing starts have to collapse. That's what it's done in the past. All of the little intricacies, and even if my explanation is wrong, the correlation is there. And a lot of people say that correlation is a causation, but if you have a correlation and it's 0.99% right or 100% of the time right, it doesn't matter what the reasoning is. You found what matters. And no one's going to know the ultimate, we'll call it the ultimate reason of absolutely everything. There's millions of decisions that are being made across everything. But in my opinion, the ultimate driver of it is the demographics, and the demographics in relationship to the housing or real estate market. And that money has to get into the system. Stimulus money by itself doesn't necessarily get into the system. It all depends on how things get into the system. I've heard all these other people talk about the demand for dollars, and that the demand for dollars is going to go up in the European whatever. I don't know. I mean, some of that stuff, I get it, and some of it, it doesn't make any, it doesn't make much sense to me. But if the driver of inflation is from housing, and that starts that rotation of that loop, that feedback loop, I think it'll continue just based off of history. I don't know if I have the full, complete reasoning behind it. I don't know if anyone does. But that's one thing I've noticed. Now, a lot of people will say the affordability of homes is getting too outrageous. I was looking at something, and here's my thing that I was looking at. You're going to lose me here. We'll zoom in here. So I've got the Housing Affordability Index. This is the affordability indexes, the composite index here. This is the Housing Affordability Index from 1970 to present. I just cut off at 2000, the year 2000. So from 1970 to the year 2000, the affordability index went from 147, and in the early 80s, went all the way down to 68.9, the affordability index. So when we had a large demographic come through in home buying years, the affordability of homes went far lower. That makes sense. Prices went from 23,000 in the median existing price in 1970, all the way in the 80s of about 83, when the composite index was pretty low, or 81, of $66,000. It went over 2 times from 1970. And I think it was far lower before 1970, in the 60s and 50s. Homes were going for a multiple less than this. And your mortgage rate, 8.35, 7.67, 7.5, 8, 9, 9.21. Your mortgage rate in 1982 was 15.38, and your home price was $67,800 from a starting price of $23,000 and a mortgage rate that was half of that mortgage rate at 8.35. The affordability index went from 147 to 69. So what I am saying in this previous bull market, and the previous large bull market in real estate, a big one, with a large demographic coming into home buying years, just like we are in the millennials, the affordability index got slammed. The interest rates doubled, and the house prices went over 2x in that area, in the median price, existing price of the United States. There are obviously pockets that went up like 5x, 10x of their entire home price from beginning to end in certain portions of the United States. Now, looking at the index, and I've got this over here on the right, this is the index of 2021 that I grabbed. It's the affordability, housing affordability index. We're at 155.8 in April of 2022, I think. This was all 2021. Sorry, this was 2021, March and April of 2021. We were at 155. It's a little bit lower now. It's like 140 or something like that. That was the beginning of the 1970 bull market, and went all the way down to 70 in the early 1980s. So we had a very large compression of the affordability throughout that time, while home prices and interest rates went up simultaneously. We had a housing shortage. So my question is, why is this time any different than the 1970s? What makes this time so much different than that? How come interest rates can't go up? Oh, because we have too much debt. Well, if they hold the interest rates lower, what do you think that's going to do to the median existing home price in the United States today? It's probably going to go through the roof if the affordability index goes to the same level. That means that the interest rate isn't going to have as much of an impact on the affordability than the home price. That means the home price is the only determining factor to price people out of the market if you're going to hold the interest rates flat. It's a bigger boom. It's even more, even a larger boom in the housing market potentially. Because if they hold interest rates low, what's to stop the movement then? 100% price. That had price and interest rate going up at the same time, affecting the affordability. So the way that I see it, it's even more of a bull market in real estate. If we don't have the supply. And if rent prices are shooting higher, which they are, what do you think people are going to do? They're going to go and buy homes. They don't care. Lock in the interest rate, lock in the price, and lock in my payment. I've got people paying far more that live next to me that are renting $3,200 a month than you can buy the house. Guess what? They struggle to buy the house because people aren't allowing them to buy it. They get outbid 50 grand over, 100 grand over. And people think, oh, well, that's unaffordable. Well, they can afford it. They just don't want to pay it. That's really what it comes down to for a lot of these people. And to conjure up an affordability argument when we should be getting a lot less affordable because the homes aren't there, I mean, that's the market basically balancing this whole thing out. Prices are going higher, inventory isn't there. That is, I think, the driver of it. That is the driver. If you get that leverage into the system, that credit expansion, if that starts to contract and deflate, if home prices were to go down, which I have no idea how that's going to happen. And this is why I don't know how it's going to happen. We have no inventory. We're building homes and we can't catch up. And then the people who are selling their homes are getting offers far greater than what they are, which means they have the highest quality offer. That these people are putting 20, 30, 40, 50% down. You think they're going to default on the house? If all of these homes are getting 20% down payments or 10% plus down payments, and the sellers get to pick the highest quality offers for the most likely closing, it's actually increasing the credit worthiness of all of the home buyers because they have the selection to pick whoever they want. So they're picking the better quality offers for a for sure closing. People can't buy a house paying $50,000 over if they have to come up with the money. They have the money. So those are the people who are getting the homes right now. Eventually that will slow down. I totally agree. I just think that we're in the hottest portion of the real estate expansionary phase, which is right in the beginning when you're transitioning from a long, prolonged, what is it called, recovery phase into an expansion phase. That's the lowest risk, is when you transfer over, because your inventory gets drawn down and you have no inventory. So I think, maybe it's just me. I mean, I'll go out on a limb. I think the people don't understand the real estate cycle. It's just that simple. I mean, to call, what they're basing is they're saying, well, we'll just wait until this happens. Wait till X happens. Wait till Y happens. Well, just look at the inventory. This stuff doesn't move fast. It's like turning the Titanic. You've got a whole year before the inventory starts going up to really make a decision. So where's the inventory going to come from? And does it matter? If there have no inventory's there. It's going to continue to go higher until the inventory shows up. That's the market trying to find a balance. It hasn't found the balance yet. The inventory hasn't showed up. So guess what? Higher prices. And as long as we have that housing starts going up and increasing, I think that it's going to be an inflationary period, which is going to continually turn on that rotation of money into commodities and precious metals and real estate. So that's kind of where my mind is at. I'll end it there. Give me a thumbs up for the content, guys. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and thank you for listening. This is Finding Value.